tell me why you think you represent the Ward 6 constituents better than your candidate.
Well, 4 years ago, one of the reasons that I ran was because I saw a divide between students in our community and longer-term residents in our community. There was a lot of strife, there was a lot of challenge, there was a lot of change, both in terms of housing and in terms of demographics of neighborhood, in terms of different lifestyles, and I didn't think the council was handling those issues fairly well. So over the last 4 years, I think we've worked really hard to build up a strong relationship with our student population, help bridge understanding, create safer rental housing conditions, work to redefine the mandate of the Town and Gown Committee, which brings the city and the universities and the students together to be able to have a productive relationship. So it's been about collaboration, it's been about listening, and it's been about trying to make a better community for all of us, and that students can be proud to call home and hopefully will decide to stick around when they leave. And that's really important for Waterloo, and I think we're seeing more and more of them.
Now, you are the incumbent councillor candidate. What are some of the accomplishments you've achieved over the last 4 years that Ward 6 constituents and students can say, yeah, we should re-elect Jeff Henley as councillor of Ward 6?
Well, I think I've already touched on some of those. I think Northdale, the near campus neighborhood, had been with a plan that wasn't working. It was, we were seeing a monoculture of 5-bedroom high-rises around the outside. We were seeing continually degrading housing on the inside, and we were seeing constant challenge and strife between students and landlords and local residents and the city. It really wasn't working. So we spent a lot of time over the first 2 months, over the first 2 years actually, of council standards, getting a new plan in place, working with the neighborhood. And we're starting to see that build up. We're starting to see mixed use. We're starting to see 1 and 2 bedrooms. We're starting to see townhouse units start to get built. We're starting to see amenities come into the neighborhood and increase walkability. So I think we're starting to see a more vibrant and dynamic neighborhood that everybody would be proud to call home in the future. And we're only starting that work. The rental housing bylaw, I think, has been really important for the safety and health of tenants, and also so everybody understands their responsibilities and we can enforce that. It's a big challenge to get through, but I think we saw great support from students' unions and the university in getting that to happen, and now we're starting to see enforcement take some action. So those are a couple of tangible examples. I could certainly go on. I've been on the region's Transit Service Improvement Committee. I think we've seen some continued improvement in transit service across the city, and the region's been good at doing that. And certainly there are any number of other issues in terms of cultural attraction, making sure that the city's a great place to stay over the weekend, so you don't have to go back to Toronto to see exciting and fun things to do. We're increasingly seeing more and more of those and more students attending some of those events. So I think those are some of the areas that have been taking a lot of work and I think have been really beneficial for not just students but the entire community.
Okay. Now let's move on a little bit to transportation. There's been somewhat of a divide about the LRT, the ION specifically. There are some folks in council that are pro LRT, there are some that are not so pro LRT.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on this side of the issue?
Well, I think the most important thing for people to know is that light rail transit and transit in general is a regional council issue. Right? It's a regional council issue, and they've made the decision to go ahead with the project. The role of the city in all of this is to help make sure that Waterloo benefits the most from the region's light rail trail project. Well, I shouldn't say the most, but certainly benefits from the LRT project, that it's smooth, that we let them know when there are problems and challenges that people are experiencing during construction, so that we can move past those. And we've already had a few of those issues that have cropped up as closures have happened, so we've been able to alert the region to this and they've solved the issue. So I think that's really important as we see the region try to move people around the city more effectively and efficiently.
But do you personally support the LRT?
I'm a transit user.
Okay.
I mean, I don't own a car. My wife and I don't own a car, so we get around the city on the same buses that you probably ride to try to get to and from where we're going to go. So I think as a long-term solution, the region certainly has a bold vision. Not everybody agrees, but I look forward to riding on it when it's done. And so certainly, again, the role of the city here is to just facilitate and make sure development is supporting the transit project to get the maximum benefit out of it. Because for this public investment, it has to work.
Okay. Now, if you get elected,
Yeah.
and over the next 4 years, what are some of your goals in working with the regional government, Waterloo region, in achieving the transit portfolio?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things we've seen in the last 4 years is a better network of express buses pop around the city. 4 years ago, canvassing across the ward was really hard for me to get to without a car. Four years later, This year, it's a lot easier. Between the 201 and the 202, it's easy to crisscross a good chunk of the ward. We need to keep making sure that those improvements are happening, that they serve Waterloo well, that they let us get where we need to go, so we have real options, every single person across the city. So as far as transit is concerned, I think there are a couple of gaps that we still need to work on addressing in Waterloo, and I've already started pushing the region on some of these, and we're trying to come up with some solutions. One is along Westmount Road. Great transit service south of University Avenue, not at all north of University Avenue. This is critical for folks living just west of Westmount. It's critical for, I think, the university colleges and for V2. But I think it's also critical for people trying to get to our new sports fields that are going to be at the end of the Laurelwood Drive extension on Northwest Campus off of Westmount. You ought to be able to not have to drive your kids to get exercise outside. That ought to be necessary. So that's a huge gap. And the other gap is the rec center in terms of people being able to get along Father David Bauer Drive by transit to get to that great amenity in the new Waterloo Park that we've put in place. So I think those are some critical improvements that we need to continue to make. And I look forward to also pressing the region on making sure that we have better after-hours service because certainly demand warrants it. You just have to see a crowded Route 7 bus at 9:30 at night or 11:30 at night to see that there's still some need out there at those odd hours that some people might not think. There's lots of riders.
Okay. Now let's move on to a hot topic issue for students, and that's student housing.
Yeah.
And it's become more of a hot topic issue now after the One Columbian fiasco. Now, you're still counselor of Ward 6 at the moment. Is there anything you would change in how you handled the Columbia One fiasco? Because I've heard from some students the city has not really reached out to them and offered them any type of support.
Well, I think people have to realize where the roles are legislatively for what's happening. The role of the city in projects is to make sure that the project design itself fits within city planning in the neighborhood, that it is built up to building code, and that it is safe to occupy. And the opportunity for us to certify occupancy comes straight from provincial legislation. And that's the checklist. In terms of issues that people have with contracts with their landlord, the province has set up the Landlord and Tenant Board specifically to deal with those issues. They have the authority, they have the responsibility, they have the knowledge, they have the process. And I think that's what's really critical for folks to have known is that that's the avenue to go to address some of those issues. And certainly city staff have been working very well, very closely with the university housing offices as they try to get the message out. Because they have the eyes and ears, I think, of students on the ground. They're in this building, just downstairs, and certainly have held some information centers that we were happy to support. So everybody that's raised some concerns to me, I provided exactly that advice for where you need to go to be able to get those concerns addressed, because running around and trying to deal with somebody who's not responsible when you could be dealing with somebody who is less efficient. So try to get people to the right place as quickly and as directly as possible. And the universities, I think, have been a great help on trying to do the same thing.
Now, are there any type of bylaws the city can implement in order to prevent something like Columbia One to occur in the future, or make sure that Columbia, like Mr. Shembri, doesn't get away with treating students in this manner?
Well, I think it's not just students that are affected sometimes when construction runs behind. I mean, we have no control over somebody's construction schedule. It's private development on private land. It's their choice to develop or not develop. The building I live in 30 years ago sat empty for about 3 or 4 years because the developer at the time went bankrupt in the middle of it. Right? So it took a while for it to be built. I hear the stories from my neighbors who were there at the time. So it always does tend to be a challenge. So I think my caution to everybody looking at a hole in the ground and being told that there's going to be a room there for them on September 1st should be cautious. And I think it's always easier personally go for something that's built that you know and you see, or that you can see is going to be completed. There's nothing that we can do to step in to force private developers to construct faster or better, because that gets into some individual areas of property ownership that we don't have authority to legislate.
And not even like some legislation on proper accommodations if there were to be delays, or
and again, provincial legislation is the area where that gets covered and meted out. I think they've the Landlord Tenant Board is very responsive, I think, on these things. Certainly their hotline is very responsive to people who are concerned. I think the protections afforded to tenants under the Landlord Tenant Act are fairly significant, and I think we've seen coverage to that effect. I'll be curious to see how the hearings go. certainly I'd say this as well. It absolutely sucks not to have a place when you're told that you're supposed to have it. That's a contract. That's what people ought to expect. At the end of the day, that is a contract dispute between two private individuals. And if the city started getting engaged between every single private contract that individuals might enter into, that would be a really huge government bureaucracy and oversight and intrusion into most private activities that you have.
But don't you think Mr. Shembri may have gotten away with it a little bit just because a lot of the tenants that signed on leases to this building are students, and students don't really have the time to get into legal battles, or can't afford
I think there are lots of
lawyers'
people in our
fees.
community who are challenged by legal issues involved, and you don't need a lawyer to be at the landlord and tenant board. That's something that's a really easy situation to apply for yourself. But I think that's why we were helping to communicate through social media. I was the city's channels and all the other tools that we had to let students know about the sessions that their off-campus housing office were offering, because they were informative. They brought in legal aid clinics to help discuss what those issues were and to provide the right information, and summaries went right away. And that was done in a very timely fashion. Like within a couple of days, there was a session that was organized, and it was fairly well attended. And I think those are the critical pieces of information for people to get. When you're in trouble, know that you can reach out and contact your off-campus housing office. You can contact the city. You can contact others. We certainly provided information as soon as we could to every single contact that we got to try to point people in the right direction so that they knew what their rights were and what they could do.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff.
No,
Thank you so much.
Thanks.